The day of the concert arrived, bright, crisp, and deceptively calm. The Choi Music Academy glowed with polished marble, gold banners, and the hushed excitement of prestige. Cameramen adjusted their equipment, guests murmured in the lobby, and the air thrummed with the kind of anticipation that lives between triumph and disaster. Lila arrived early. She moved quietly through the backstage corridors, her black dress simple but elegant, her hair tied in a neat chignon. To anyone watching, she looked serene. Inside, she was an exposed wire, every breath vibrating with tension. She stopped outside the grand hall doors. Through them, she could hear the faint sound of an orchestra warming up, the sharp burst of a violin, the low hum of a cello. She closed her eyes. For 10 years, she had avoided this sound, the living pulse of a world that had once destroyed her. Tonight, she was walking back into it, not as a victim but as a ghost with a purpose. Across the hall, Adrian Choi's name gleamed in gold letters on a poster, 10th anniversary concert, the maestro returns. Underneath, in smaller print, was a list of the evening's performers. Near the end, solo performance, Sophia Choi, her silent note. Anonymous composer, Lila's lips curved into a subtle smile. The symmetry of it all was perfect. Backstage, Sophia sat on a stool, dressed in ivory satin, her small hands trembling slightly as she clutched her music sheets. Lila knelt beside her, fixing the bow in her hair. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. Sophia nodded. "A little. Daddy said this is the biggest audience he's ever played for. What if I mess up?" "You won't," Lila said. "Music isn't about perfection, Sophia. It's about truth. Just play what you feel. The rest will follow." The girl smiled shyly, her eyes full of trust. "You'll be watching, right?" "I wouldn't miss it," Lila said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Now go warm up." As Sophia skipped away toward the rehearsal room, Adrian appeared from the side corridor. His tuxedo was flawless, his posture confident, but his eyes, for once, were sharp and restless. "I should thank you," he said smoothly, stepping closer. "You've done wonders with Sophia. She hasn't stopped talking about you." Lila didn't flinch. "She's gifted. She plays with sincerity. Something you could learn from." His smirk faltered, just slightly. "Still bitter after all these years, Lila? You can't live in the past forever." "I don't live there anymore," she said quietly. "I'm just here to close the door." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for cracks. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "I know about the piece. You thought I wouldn't recognize it? The phrasing, the dissonance, it's your work." Lila's heartbeat stilled. "I admit," he said, almost admiringly, "it's beautiful. Maybe the best thing you've ever written. But you made a mistake leaving it anonymous. Once the audience hears it, they'll assume I inspired it, maybe even composed it. You'll give me another masterpiece, Lila." She stared at him, her voice steady but cold. "You always mistake silence for submission." He leaned in, smiling faintly. "And you mistake revenge for redemption." Before she could respond, a stagehand called his name. Adrian straightened his jacket and walked away, leaving a trail of expensive cologne and arrogance. Lila stood still for a long moment, gripping the edge of the piano until her knuckles whitened. The old pain clawed at her, but beneath it burned something steadier, focus. She would not lose this time. As the concert began, the grand hall came alive. The first few performances passed in waves of polite applause and polite smiles. Adrian conducted the orchestra, charming the crowd effortlessly. He was in his element, adored, untouchable. Lila sat among the teachers near the front, her expression unreadable. When her gaze drifted to the wings, she saw Sophia standing there, waiting for her turn. The girl looked so small, so radiant, clutching her sheet music like a lifeline. Then the lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. Next, we have a special solo performance by our youngest prodigy, Sophia Choi, performing an original composition titled Her Silent Note. The composer remains anonymous. A hush fell. Sophia walked onto the stage. The audience murmured softly, admiration, surprise, curiosity. She bowed gracefully and took her seat at the grand piano. From the wings, Adrian watched with pride. From the front row, Lila watched with fire. The first note rang out, soft, trembling, delicate as a heartbeat. The melody began its slow ascent, a fragile whisper of memory. Then came the second movement, swelling with conflict and emotion. Each note was a confession, a wound reopened. The crowd leaned in. By the third movement, the music grew darker, twisting, breaking apart. The chords clashed in ways that felt wrong yet beautiful. And then, near the end, came the motif, a sharp echo of the Sonata of Glass. Lila's breath caught. Adrian's smile faded. He heard it, his theft, hidden inside the melody for everyone to recognize. The audience wouldn't notice, but he did. Every stolen phrase, every measure she had once written, now distorted and reclaimed. Sophia reached the final bars. Her small hands trembled, her eyes fixed on the sheet. The music built to its climax, a violent, breathtaking crescendo, and then stopped. No resolution. No closing chord. Just silence. A long, raw, unbearable silence. For a moment, the hall was frozen. Then the applause erupted, wild, thunderous, unstoppable. Sophia smiled shyly and bowed, unaware of the storm she just unleashed. Adrian stood backstage, his face pale, his hands clenched. His legacy, his lies, they all lived inside that song now, in plain sight. Every note a confession that only he could hear. Lila remained seated, her expression calm. When the applause began to fade, she whispered under her breath, "Now you know what silence sounds like." Later that night, after the concert ended, Adrian found her near the empty stage. The hall was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels like aftermath. "You think this changes anything?" he said, his voice low. "No one knows what you did. You've hidden again, like you always do." Lila turned to him. "The truth doesn't need an audience, Adrian. It just needs to exist." He stepped closer, anger flickering beneath his composure. "You used my daughter. She played my song," Lila said. "The same one you stole. That's not using, that's reclaiming." He exhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this." She smiled faintly. "No, Adrian. You will." Then she handed him a small envelope, sealed in red wax, and walked away without another word. He tore it open. Inside was a single page of sheet music, the final bars of Her Silent Note. At the bottom, written in her hand, "For the man who turns silence into theft. Now silence will answer you back." As the last lights dimmed over the stage, Adrian stood alone, the paper trembling in his hand. Outside, rain began again, soft, relentless, steady as a metronome. And somewhere, down the quiet corridor of the academy, Lila's footsteps faded, one by one, like the end of a song that refuses to die. The audience didn't just applaud, they rose to their feet. A wave of admiration swept through the grand concert hall, echoing against the marble walls like a heartbeat refusing to slow. People turned to each other in astonishment, whispering words like haunting, masterpiece, revolutionary. The young prodigy on stage smiled shyly and bowed again, her dress catching the glow of the stage lights. But amid the standing ovation, two figures didn't move. Adrian Choi stood near the curtain, his jaw tight, his face pale. And in the shadows near the side aisle, Lila Han sat motionless, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on him. He knew. She knew. Every note of that song had exposed him. Not to the audience, they didn't recognize the melody, but to himself. To his guilt. To the ghosts he'd buried beneath applause and fame. The last chord, the unfinished silence that had hung in the air like a verdict, still rang in his ears. Sophia's small footsteps echoed backstage as she ran into her father's waiting arms. "Daddy. Did you hear me?" Everyone clapped so much. He forced a smile, hugging her tightly. "You were incredible, sweetheart." Her laughter was pure, bright, completely untouched by the storm raging behind his composed smile. Over Sophia's shoulder, his eyes found Lila's across the corridor. She stood by the doorway, silent, still, like a phantom who had finally come home to haunt the place that destroyed her. He excused himself and handed Sophia her bouquet. "Go show your flowers to Ms. Lila, okay? Daddy needs to talk to the director." Sophia skipped off, and as soon as she turned away, Adrian's expression shifted, the warmth vanished, replaced by fury. Lila knelt to greet Sophia. "You played beautifully," she said softly, taking the girl's hands. "Thank you." Daddy said the song was special. He didn't tell me who wrote it though. "Do you know?" Lila smiled faintly, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite sorrow. "Yes, I do. It was written by someone who learned that silence can be stronger than sound." Sophia giggled. "That sounds like something out of a storybook." "It is," Lila whispered. "And one day, you'll understand the ending." The girl tilted her head in confusion, but before she could ask anything more, Adrian appeared behind them. His voice was calm, but too controlled. "Sophia, go wait by the car." "But, now." She obeyed, glancing back once, uncertain. The moment she disappeared through the doors, the air shifted. "You really think this little stunt changes what happened?" Adrian said quietly. Lila stood, meeting his gaze without fear. "It doesn't change what happened. It reveals what you've become." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You humiliated me. Using my daughter? That's cruel, even for you." Her lips barely curved. "You took my song. My life. My name. I simply returned your lesson, note for note." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You think the world will believe you? No one even knows who wrote it. You've hidden behind anonymity again, because you can't stand in the light." "I don't need to," Lila said softly. "Truth doesn't need light. It only needs to exist." He laughed, but the sound cracked. "You always were dramatic. And you," she said, "were always afraid." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air between them thick with history, regret, and something darker that neither dared to name. Then she reached into her bag and took out a sealed envelope. "This belongs to you," she said, handing it to him. "What is this?" "The ending," she said simply. "You changed it once. Let's see what you do with this one." And before he could respond, she turned and walked away. Adrian didn't open it until he was alone in his dressing room. The applause from the final act still roared faintly outside, muffled through the thick velvet curtains. His hands trembled as he tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of music, her handwriting sharp and familiar. The final measures of her silent note. At the bottom, a message written in clean, deliberate ink: "You took my ending. Now I take yours." He stared at it, a chill crawling up his spine. For the first time in his career, the silence around him felt unbearable. He could hear the phantom sound of her song echoing in his head, the dissonance, the unfinished phrase, the echo of something unhealed. He dropped the paper on the vanity, breathing hard. The lights above him seemed too bright, the mirror too cruel. For a moment, he thought he saw her reflection standing behind him, calm, unblinking, her lips forming a word he couldn't hear. He spun around. No one was there. But the scent of old piano wood lingered. Meanwhile, outside, reporters swarmed the lobby. Sophia had been named the youngest prodigy of the decade. Her photo flashed on screens, her music, Lila's music, spreading online, already going viral. Critics were calling it a haunting rebirth of classical emotion. The irony wasn't lost on Lila as she stepped out into the rain. Fame had found her melody again, but not her name. And yet, that was exactly how she wanted it. Because anonymity was freedom. Silence was power. The streets glistened as she walked toward the sea. Every raindrop sounded like a piano key, every gust of wind like applause carried from another lifetime. She stopped by the water's edge, her reflection trembling on the dark surface. It was over. Or at least, she thought it was. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number: "You think the song was yours alone? You should have checked the last page." Her stomach tightened. She flipped open her worn satchel and pulled out her own copy of the sheet music, the one she had submitted. Her eyes widened. The last page, the one she'd written herself, wasn't hers anymore. Someone had replaced it. The notes were altered. Slightly. Subtly. But enough to change everything. Her silent note, her message, her vengeance, no longer ended in silence. It now resolved, perfectly. Beautifully. Just like his version of the Sonata of Glass. Her breath caught. Adrian had gotten to it before the performance. He had rewritten her ending again. The realization burned through her: humiliation, fury, disbelief. For a long moment, she stood in the rain, the wind tearing at her coat, the waves crashing behind her. Then, slowly, she began to smile. He still couldn't help himself. Even after being exposed, he had to control the story. And that was his mistake. Because now, she knew exactly where to strike next. Inside the academy, Adrian sat alone at his piano, staring at the altered sheet music. His reflection wavered on the polished lid, the silence thick around him. He didn't notice the small USB drive taped beneath the seat, planted there earlier that day, containing audio files, emails, and drafts of the original Sonata of Glass. Proof of everything. Lila had written her revenge in more than music. As thunder rolled in from the sea once more, the faint sound of a piano echoed from somewhere deep in the building, a slow, deliberate melody that made his blood run cold. She wasn't done. Not yet.